My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day, waiting for a long time.
The biggest trade war in more than a century got off to a rough start.
I'm just hearing in my ear the Dow is down more than 1,700 points. It's now down 1,713, 14, 22, 25. I'm going to stop looking at that right now.
US President Donald Trump announced substantial tariffs on the entire world, only to walk almost all of them back a week later as global markets plummeted.
Yeah, people were getting a little queasy. I think people were yippy, a little bit afraid, unlike these champions, because we have a big job to do.
But tariffs on China, a key US trading partner, were pushed even higher. China was among the countries that imposed their own counter-tariffs on US imports.
中方的立场是明确一贯的，谈大门敞开，但对话必须在相互尊重的基础上，以平等方式进行。打中国，中方也将奉陪到底。
Trump intends to reshape the global economic order in his own image. And a big part of his plan centers on something he's been obsessed with for a very long time.
And I've been talking about it for 35 years, how our country is being ripped off. The fact is, we have to manufacture our own product. We have to take our manufacturing back from China.
Can the US topple China as the factory of the world? Modern-day China is a manufacturing powerhouse, responsible for some 35% of all global manufactured goods. Chinese factories churn out everything from smartphones to sex dolls at a remarkable pace. But rewind a few decades, and you will find a very different place. This chart shows the rise of China's share of global manufacturing over the last 20 years.
So really it started in the mid-1990s when multinational corporations from other than the United States came to China, realizing it was a good place at that point to build resource-intensive or labor-intensive types of products. So toys, footwear, furniture.
China at the time was in the midst of a radical shift. Then leader Deng Xiaoping had ushered in market reforms that sparked an era of rapid economic development dubbed the Chinese economic miracle. Meanwhile, another radical shift was changing the world.
This, of course, was assisted by the IT revolution. You know, this is the period where everybody now has a computer on their desk and the ability to send specs to China electronically. But as China signed up to become a member of the World Trade Organization, and importantly, that was facilitated by an agreement with the United States at the end of the 1990s.
The United States is delighted by this historic achievement, nearly 9 years in the making.
That gave American corporations, I think, the security they needed to really push into China. And I think, you know, it was a gradual development, but the early 2000s became a period of what looks like very rapid change.
Today, if you list the world's top 10 manufacturing countries, China, at number 1, produces more goods than the other 9 nations combined. Meanwhile, in the US, a very different story has been playing out.
I think it's wrong to think that if China hadn't joined the WTO, that the US would still be making plastic laundry baskets.
For many Americans, the era of manufacturing that built industrial cities like Detroit and Buffalo is a distant memory. The deindustrialization of cities and towns began in the late 1970s. But the sharpest drop occurred decades later. Here's the story in 2 charts. For 20 years, US manufacturing jobs suffered continued but gradual losses. But in the year 2000, the bottom fell out, and the American manufacturing sector booked a decade of deep cuts to the tune of nearly 6 million jobs. Here's a comparison of the share of global manufacturing by country. As American manufacturing went into a deep decline, China rose to become the world's single largest manufacturer.
It's not just China who is an actor in this process. Multinationals are facilitating this, and enormous wealth was created through this process.
Across 2 presidential terms, Trump has boasted that he alone can bring manufacturing back to the United States.
Hopefully, you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right.
Tariffs have been the Trump administration's primary weapon in the ongoing trade war.
On the trade front, China will suffer more than the US does. But on the political front, the Chinese leadership may think they have a much bigger upper hand because China is not an election-based political system, whereas in the US, leaders have to keep in mind the political cost.
In China, many were already struggling with a post-pandemic economic slowdown before the latest round of tariffs took effect. The job market for many fresh graduates remains bleak, with some job postings receiving more than 1 million applications.
In China, what worries me the most is the impact of this trade war with the US on employment, because for the last few years, unemployment in China, especially for the young people, has become worse and worse.
While the Trump administration's first trade war with China successfully shifted some manufacturing to other countries, like Vietnam, India, and Mexico, bringing manufacturing jobs back to the US remains a far more difficult task.
For many years, the Chinese people and Chinese leaders have been complaining how little money Chinese companies have been making. For example, many mobile devices, when they are sold by manufacturers in China, they may be priced at $20 or $30 a piece. But when they are sold in the US at the retail level, the prices may be as high as $1,000 or more.
These Chinese-made AI video memes on social media mock the idea of Americans working in factories and on assembly lines.
Realistically, I don't think even the policymakers in the US, or including President Trump himself, really believe that realistically they can shift a lot of the manufacturing back to the US.
Trump administration officials, for their part, say that the tariffs will work.
What if they're wrong?
They're not going to be wrong. It is going to work. And we are focused on restoring the golden age of America and making America a manufacturing superpower.
Experts are not so sure.
As many manufacturers say now, they're having trouble finding people who want to work in factories or who have the skills necessary to work with advanced manufacturing equipment.
It would be even more difficult to produce low-cost goods while also paying American wages.
Now, can these activities come back to the United States? My gut is some will, but the price of having labor-intensive activities done entirely in the US is something that US consumers, in my view, are not willing to pay.
In China, the result will likely be further decoupling from the United States.
Africa, ASEAN, and South America and East European countries, these are some of the high growth destinations for China. So the total amount of export to ASEAN countries of almost $300 billion is roughly 60% of China's exports to the US. So they have been trying to diversify away from the US market. So the long-term economic adjustment is just unavoidable. So